el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogarplenitud.org.es, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, Serenidad.es, Permasalud Glamping, permasalud.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new program. Today, we have the second part of an interview made to Philip Aaberg about his musical journey. And in this second part, we are going to concentrate on his 21st century music. If you want to listen to the first part, browse through our YouTube channel or look for it in Spotify or iVoox. And I hope you enjoy this second part of the program. If you want to know more about Philip, you can just tune in to the first part of the program, which was about the 20th century music. We're going to be back with the interview and the music right after these short messages.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como GoyPazR, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad S. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Este es el espacio de New Age.
Okay, so we're again back for the second part of the 21st century music with Phil. And before we start, I want to share with you some messages from the Windham Hill fan page in Facebook. So here is Jenna Mamina says, please say hello.
Hi, Jenna. Great singer.
There's another message from James Carroll Weber who says, this is not a question, but you might consider mentioning that a fan of his music who lives in La Crosse, Wisconsin, has listened to his music more than anybody else's in the history of the world. It's wonderful to listen to on its own or as background music while working on tasks. All best regard to Mr. Aaberg.
That's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
I loved it when I played in La Crosse too.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, and finally, Benjamin Lovell wants to know what really gets you going.
Pretty much everything. As you mentioned in the earlier interview, it's nature really gets me going. Really gets me going. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time, I'm a fly fisherman, so I spend a lot of time in rivers and around rivers. And late in my life now, it's not so much about catching fish as it is being in the places that are so beautiful, because for some reason, trout like to live in really pretty places. I love that. I love being around my family. Here's a funny one. I love practicing the piano.
Oh, that's great.
I love practicing the piano. And I'm lucky that way. I really like it. It's not a chore. It's not a chore for me. It's like, I love performing too, but the preparation and the learning that you always do when you play, and that, I feel like I was lucky to choose the piano as an instrument. I don't have to have anybody else around. I love playing with other people, but I really don't need anybody else. Yeah. And it's a world. It's a big old world inside that piano. It's a universe.
Mm-hmm. It is.
It gets me going.
Christopher, who brought us the piano. But now, let me ask you something. Last interview, you mentioned something about your mother and how she had recorded some albums, and you just found about them. How old were you when you found about those albums?
It was about a week ago. Well, I knew about the albums before that, but I didn't have a 78 turntable to play them on.
Uh-huh.
And because they were recorded on that old speed, 78 RPMs. And so this was a place in Spokane, Washington, where, they had places like this, studios where you could go in, students could go in and there'd be a nice piano and they'd make you a record and they would cut a disc and give that disc to you. So I found two of those, mainly there's Mozart and Chopin, I think are what's represented there. And yeah, that was great to see and to have this little snapshot of another time and of my mother's life when she was in her early 20s.
Wow.
And before she had children, and when she maybe thought of being a musician, you know. I mean, it's the idea of being a musician coming out of Chester, Montana is pretty foreign for anybody. But I'm pretty sure she had that idea because she played really well.
Yeah, and were you surprised to listen to those albums?
I kind of figured she'd be good.
Yeah.
She was very musical. She had the church choir, you know, and she had, and I actually hear some of, in her playing, I hear some of the, everybody has a certain way they approach things, approach melodies and approach things if they're not highly trained, you know, by one teacher or one school kind of thing. And I could hear those things in the way she conducted the choir and the way she sang and the way she would play. Like, you know, when you're a beginner, you always have these little duets that your teacher plays with. So I was lucky that I didn't have to wait for my teacher. My mother could play them with me. So I got to hear what the piano would sound like, not just the little, you know, because they would do, you know, stuff. And it was, so I got to hear what different harmonies would sound like and what the full piano would sound like before I could actually play it.
Yeah, great.
It was great. It was great.
What an experience. Now, in year 2000, you started recording and launching the albums in your own label, the Sweetgrass Music label.
Yes.
And Field Notes was the first album, I guess, that you launched in your own label. What changed since Cinema that now you launched through Sweetgrass Music? What changed?
Yeah. Well, you know, I really needed a break from Windham Hill. I needed a break from the kind of touring and from the what I thought was happening to the record at that point, which was a different kind of label than when Will Ackerman had it, I'll have to say. More industry people had come on board and they were trying to sell more records of a certain type, and they wanted to have a certain sound. You know, and of course the market was getting pretty flooded by imitators, different labels that thought there was a new age sound, and maybe there is. So I spent I'm trying to think of the interim years there, and I spent quite a bit of that time with the Paul Drescher Ensemble, which was a great chamber music group run by Paul Drescher. I mean, wonderful, wonderful players in this group, and we were they called it the electro-acoustic ensemble. So we played synthesizers and acoustic instruments too. Paul Hansen was maybe the best bassoonist in the world, the most great improvising bassoonist in the world, for sure. Wonderful players in there. And kind of a floating group, not really, it was pretty steady for a while there. So I played with them for a long time, and what we did was, I played Paul's music, we played a little bit of mine, some of Paul Hansen's music, and composers from around the world would write for us, write for the ensemble. So I was immersed in these new music techniques, these new ideas and different styles of composing. And we had Japanese composers compose for us, and we had people from all over the place. So that was a really great period of time. And after that, I think I was ready to do some more recording. And I have to talk about this because George Winston just passed, and he was a good friend, and he spent some of his life in Montana, I think, as a youth. So that place was always really close to him, and he was such a great fan of everybody's music. I've never met anybody who knew so much about other people's music. I mean, there was a time when he used to send somebody around to record my concerts, so he would get these tapes, and listen to them. And, you know, he'd call me up and he'd say, you know that thing you did with your left hand in that African piece? And I'd say, no, because it was just totally off the cuff for me. He'd say, why don't you do that? And so field notes. My wife, Patricia Belknap at the time, was one of the first employees at Windham Hill. And we didn't get together until quite a bit after that. And so we were trying to figure out, do I want to release records again of my own? And we decided yes. And she said, we can do this. I know how to do this. I work for Windham Hill. So sure enough, we've been able to have this little record company. You know, a lot of people do now have their own companies, and then you're able to kind of do what you want to do. Field Notes, actually, George Winston called me one day and he says, I'm down at Russian Hill Studios. Do you want to come down and record some stuff? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. He said, well, I'd love to have you come down and I've always wanted to just be around when you were making a record. And so I went in and I improvised for a couple of hours. And this was right after I'd been doing a lot of stuff with Paul Drescher. In fact, we had just done some pieces of John Adams, who I knew at Harvard. And John has a particular way of sort of doing phase music, and so does Paul. So those techniques were kind of in my fingers, so I used a lot of those in the improvisation. Field Notes is, I don't know, it might be one of my favorite records, and people say, well, that's your least accessible record. I say, I don't know. That's not my job. You know. So yeah, I went in there and spent an evening with George in Russian Hill and recorded most of that. Some of it I recorded at studio that my friend Tony Mills had. So there's 2 piano sounds in there, because some of it was, I was also writing music for the Montana Repertory Theater, which is out of the University of Montana. So I wrote music for 3 of their productions. The first one was To Kill a Mockingbird. And I think, I'm not really sure, but I think that might have been the only time that play had music that was written for it. You know, usually theater plays don't have music unless they're a musical. So that was done. They actually toured that in China too.
Wow.
So I wanted to record some of that music as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a great album, I must say. And from this album, we're going to listen to Forgiving Water, Forgiveness, Big Low Banjo, and Don't Stop Now. So
great.
those songs are going to be heard by the listeners. I'm sure most of your fans know about it, but for new fans, it's going to be a blast to listen to this music. So let's listen to this, and we'll be back, because you had another album on year 2000, which was Live at Montana. And we'll talk about that concert.
Great.
Okay, great.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces, este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Abre las puertas de tu mundo interior y permanece con New Age.
So Phil, in what city was Live from Montana recorded, and how much does it influence in your performance, knowing that your show will be recorded for an album?
Yeah, that's great questions. It was recorded in my hometown of Chester, Montana. And the house I grew up in was not quite right across the street, but past a little half a block, and then you're at the school. And it was in the auditorium there. The auditorium was a really great room. I mean, the town, when I grew up, had 1,000 people. Now it has about 800. And the auditorium itself holds 600. So the superintendent of the school at the time that auditorium was built was also the band director. And so when it came time to build an auditorium, he said, I'm going to build a good one. And he did. And there's a lot of stuff has happened in that auditorium. So, yeah, a friend of mine that I worked with when I played with the band, Newgrange, Tim Carter, came from Tennessee and recorded it for me. And we brought in portable, tape machines and stuff and set them up in the teacher's room backstage and set up the microphones. And, I practiced a lot to play that so that I didn't have to do a lot of starting and stopping. And it was all, let's see, I'm trying to think. I think there was one piece I redid after the crowd had left. And I think George, so here's the other part of that story. It was for, I think it was an all-school reunion. So in that little town, they don't have like the class of 67 or whatever. That class usually doesn't have a reunion. They'll have everybody who ever went to the school, because then they can have a big party, and the population of the town doubles or triples at that point. So all these people are here. So when you hear the crowd noise, there was a lot of folks in that room, which was great, and they were all ready to celebrate. So it was wonderful to play for them, but it was like a performance. I didn't really, like I said, I think there were I think there were two pieces that I actually repeated one of them during the concert, and then another one I recorded after people were gone. So I didn't worry too much about, what the fact that people were listening to me. That's what I do all the time. When I play, you try and play as good as you can. Of course, there's a different feel, and there's a little different feedback. And I think that's the reason you have live albums, because you can actually put that on an album. You actually feel that a little bit. I'm going to do that as an LP, so that'll be another release later. But when I do it as an LP, I'll have to cut out the crowd noise and the talking, and maybe cut a couple of songs out too. But I went over during the afternoon to set up the microphones, make sure everything was good, and then Peter Bryant, my piano tuner, was coming after that to work on the piano. And so I'm playing along, and I look out into the audience, and there's this guy sitting sitting in one of the rows, like way over against the wall. And he's kind of down like this. He has a hat on, and then he moves to the center. And so I get down and I walk by him. I says, George. And it's George Winston, who, he said, yeah, I heard you were going to do that record. He said, I couldn't miss that. So he showed up. And that was really nice. That was nice to have him in the crowd, and nice to have him there, have that little level of encouragement and understanding too, which was really cool. And then afterwards, like, there was a song I wasn't going to put in there. I think it was Swoop. And I should do that one again. That's a good song. Yeah. He said, and I was going to left it out, and he said, "Oh no, you got to put that one in there."
I just wonder which songs would you like me to share with the audience from this live at Montana? Because the cover is also amazing. It has the fish, and so when you talk about fishing, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's very Montana.
Yeah, Monty Dolak, one of the great illustrators from Montana.
Yeah, great.
Did that cover. Well, I think Westbound. So Westbound is a really good one to do it because, Westbound is a train piece, and it emulates the trains. And I talked about that a little bit. But it was so funny because at the end, I get quieter. I do it a little different now. But at that point, I was kind of fading out the very ending. And at that point, the train is about 4 blocks from the auditorium, and the train came through town, and you could hear the whistle on the recording. So the timing of that train going through and whistling was perfect. That's why people started laughing at the end of that song.
Oh, I
It
see.
was pretty great. Yeah.
Okay, two other songs.
Yeah. Before Barbed Wire, I think is a great one to play. Yeah.
What by what? Before what? One?
Before Barbed, Barbed wire.
Oh, okay, okay.
And that's actually the name of a book of photographs of that region of Montana that was taken before cattle were there and before the Indians were put on reservations, and so it was a real openness to that song. I did. I played that at La Chamizal, which is a park in. Well, it's a peace park between Mexico and the United States, and when the Rio Grande would come up into the United States, that was the boundary. Rio Grande was the boundary of between the two countries. So it'd come up in the United States, and then the Mexican army would rush in and claim that land, and then it'd go down into Mexico, and the American army would rush in. So they got tired of that, and they made it into a peace park, so that people from both sides could come and see their families on either side freely. Wow. Not sure what's going on there. Yeah, it was. So I played that in the park, and when I announced the name and started playing it, people started crying. And I talked to them afterwards about what's going on, between our borders at this point. Mm-hmm. Wow. So yeah, that piece has a lot of meaning to me.
Yeah, amazing. And one more that you can recall that we can share from live from Montana?
Yeah, let's see. Ones that we haven't played in the other show. Did we play Frog? Yeah, we played Frogman, didn't we? Yeah.
No, but that was last show. We can put Frogman today here too.
Oh yeah.
That was last show. You want me to click Frogman?
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Wonderful. So this is the only album I was going to ask you for you to give me the songs, because a lot of them are already in other albums that we have listened, but in this case it was live, and I wanted to hear your experiences with this.
Great. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Frogman. Okay, so we'll listen to Westbound before Barbed Wire, and Barbed Wire is that the thing that.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Now.
Yep.
And Frogman from live from Montana, and then
Great.
We'll be back. We have a couple more albums to talk about, and we'll continue.
Very nice. Thank you.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085.
Respira profundo y fluye con New Age.
Okay, so we are now in 2003, and you recorded an adagio of Samuel Barber for Windham Hill. Well, why did you choose the adagio, and how did it come together that you recorded again for Windham Hill?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think I recorded that anywhere else for them, did I? No. I think that's the first time.
Yeah.
I recorded an adagio, the Schumann.
Uh-huh.
The adagio is just means
small
walking. Yeah. And yeah, well, the Barber, it's such a beautiful piece, and I'm trying to think what happened. I think Barbara Higbee and I played that as a duet on a tour that we did, and that was it's such a great piece. And so I played piano and the synthesizers on it. I just wanted to do that version, which I think it's quite a bit. It's not different dramatically, but it's definitely different than a lot of orchestras play it. Mm-hmm. It's a very intimate piece. And Barbara, I love Barbara as a composer,
Montreux, she was in Montreux. Amazing.
Yeah.
It was great group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great album, actually, Adagio. It has amazing interpretations from all the composers, all the musicians, from everybody that chose something very special, and it's a great album too. So we're gonna listen to your Adagio from Samuel Barber for this album, and then actually we're gonna. I think we ought to listen to it alone, because then we're going to go to Blue West from a 2005 album. And I think it's not exactly what about. So let's listen to Adagio and we'll be back.
Great.
Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como Ngoypas R, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad EC. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
Permítenos acompañarte con New Age.
So Phil, trains are something you know very well from living in Chester. That's where you live, right? You live in Chester, right? Or...
We did live in Chester for quite a while after we moved back to Montana, and now we live in Helena, which is the capital city.
Helena, it's great. And so the cover for Blue West, your album in 2005, has some trains. What is this project about? Blue West.
Well, it had originally started. It was an idea that I had given the idea to Windham Hill that I would record classic blues, and I think George had done that earlier. He'd written a bunch of blues songs.
He just there was a release of something about Montana, an album.
He just did Eastern Montana. Yeah,
yes, exactly.
But way back in the early part of his career with Windham Hill, he had a song called Blues and Ballads, I think, and he did some blues. But so that was a long time ago. But so I had proposed this idea of doing, classic blues of different classical blues players, and one of them was. So that's Chicago Breakdown by Maceo Merriweather, Big Maceo. So that was the idea, and then I started writing all kinds of blues. As I realized, and Paul Drescher told me this, composer that I worked with, he said, once you start composing, it's addictive, and you get so you don't really want to play anybody else's music. And I think there's some of that that's truthful. So what happened with me was I started writing all these other blues pieces or blues influenced pieces, and they said, well, that's not what we wanted, really. I said, oh, okay, well, that's what I want. So we recorded that on
your label,
on Sweetgrass Music. Record just about killed me, because it was for another the release. We had time for another all school reunion. I was going to play the whole album for them and then make sure I had the record out. And so I had it all recorded, but I had to mix it and sequence it and stuff. And I worked 26 hours straight without sleeping, and I'll never do that again.
It's crazy.
Don't do that. No, it's not a good idea. Yeah.
Not even if you're that young, but you did it. It's an experience.
It was. And so the idea was to have blues, from my experience playing with a lot of great blues players, but to do it in my own compositional way, which is really different from traditional.
So we'll listen from this album, That Train, Blue West, Little Brother, and Sea Level Shuffle, the part 2, because you have 2 parts. So are they good choices?
Sure. The one I would do maybe is Dream of Montana Taylor, which is a slower one.
Okay.
Maybe instead of Sea Level Shuffle, I don't know. Throw a slow one in there.
Dream of Montana
Taylor.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. I'll do that change.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Let's do that. Yeah. Listen to the music, and we'll be back for Tuliwamu. Okay.
Permasalud Glamping Lodge te espera en la provincia de Imbabura, en Ecuador, para que te conectes con la naturaleza, recuperes energía y bienestar. Te ofrecemos domos full equipados y carpas de glamping con toda comodidad. Escoge entre paquetes básicos de estadía y paquetes completos que incluyen desayuno y acceso al área de nuestra piscina natural con baño turco e hidromasaje. ¿Necesitas un espacio de paz y tranquilidad? Entonces este es el lugar preciso. Visita nuestra web permasalud.com o envíanos un mensaje de WhatsApp al 0999-203-203.
Estás escuchando New Age, el programa de la nueva era.
Okay, now, how did your collaboration with Kinobi, I think it is, came about for Tuli Wamo in 2012? What is this project about?
Yeah, so Shinobi, really great human being and a great musician. His manager at the point, I think, was maybe also managing Eugene Friesen, the great cellist that I played with on Three-Part Invention, which maybe you'll get around to. I don't know. It's a great record. And so Shinobi's agent or manager called me and said Shinobi really wanted to make a record with me. And I said, oh, great. So this was in the dead of winter in Montana. He flew from, he's African, and lives in the warm part of Africa. So he flew into Montana. I don't think it was snowing, but there was a lot of snow on the ground. And he said, I've never seen so much snow in my life. So my son Jake was pretty young at the time, and he took him out and started throwing snowballs at him, and that was a good warm-up for what we were doing. We did some workshops together. We went around to some schools and did some things. And, there was a time, this was kind of an era when everybody was taking African music and different music and taking little chunks of it and looping it, and then making pieces with those loops. So I guess I philosophically didn't feel I wanted to do something like that. I feel that there's a great sort of textbook about African music called African Music and African Sensibility, and there was a CD that came with it that talks about really the different types of music, particularly the rhythmic stuff, and the whole idea, the background of what music is in a lot of different cultures in Africa, the import of it and how it's different from what it is here. So I wanted to make sure that Shinobi didn't want me to do that. I said, okay, I'll do this record with you, but we have to do it together. And he said, oh. I said, yeah. So I had to find out whether he could adapt, whether he could improvise. And the master drummer can improvise in African music. There's a steady rhythm, and then they play like crazy stuff all over the top of it. And he could do that, but I wanted to see if he would go where I went sometimes, if we were playing something, if I took a turn, if he would follow. And yeah, he could do that. So I said, great, let's do this. And so we spent some time together, just sort of, he was telling me he brought all the instruments that he had made himself, and he made the cases for them and brought them over, in the plane. And we had a whole station wagon basically full of them, and filled my little studio up with them and set them all up. And my son Jake was real little at that point, and he would come in and he'd see these instruments, and he'd sit down and he'd start playing. And I was kind of like, because some musicians don't want anybody to touch their instruments. So Shinobi just picked up another one and started playing with Jake. And I thought, okay, this is very cool. So the idea of music as a multi-generational and a communal thing, and there are master musicians, but he said that so close to his village was close to like the king's place, and there was a little wall around that, and they would go into the courtyard, and at night, and the master musicians would all play, and it was amazing. And then the mothers would be there with their kids, little kids. And towards the end of the night, all the little kids would get up and start playing instruments too, and the master musicians would play with them, and that's how they learned. And they just brought them in, which is a really different kind of tradition. I mean, I think maybe some bluegrass music is close to that, where people sit down and they just play. But this idea of welcoming all players into the circle to play I thought was pretty great. So Shinobi and I would start, a lot of times he would start a rhythm, or I'd start a rhythm. And some of the instruments were tuned in particular ways, so I would have to find what they were tuned to. And I remember the balafone, which is kind of like a marimba, it had wooden, let's see, what would you call those? Tone bars, I guess. And so it was out of tune to the piano. I said, what are we going to do? So he got out a knife, and he knew. So I learned some physics of sound, of how things tune. Like, you can't really add wood to that to change the sound. So you have to take it from a different part of the tone bar. So he spent a couple hours tuning the balafone to the piano. And then, see, what was that song? I haven't played that forever. It was fun to sort of throw blues and Western feel into the stuff that he was doing, and he would follow that. We wrote all those pieces together, and we got to play them a couple times. But he tours with his brothers and another group, and he teaches dance and teaches all these things. He's a really pretty amazing human being.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a total blast. It was really fun. I love the album too.
I mean, how life brings together people and how you can create things for no apparent reason. It just happens.
Right.
Yeah, from Tuliwamu, we're gonna listen to Peaceful Plain, and the first song, which is Niña Linea, something like that.
Niña Linea. Yeah. So Tuliwamu, we were talking about, when I had said, I don't want to just lay like some music over the top of what you're doing. We have to do this together. So I said, what are we going to call this record? And he said, Tuliwamu. I said, I love the way it sounds. What does it mean? He says, it means we are together.
Oh, cool. Nice. Yeah. It makes sense. These songs are, I really enjoy this, how it starts, and it's very upbeat, and this is really nice. Great. So let's listen to these songs, and we'll be back for the last album that I imagine you have, which is Versatile. Is that how it's said? Versatile?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we'll be back for our last segment, and I want to thank all the Windham Hill fans that have sent all the messages. I don't know if I'll see if there's any other message, but that was so nice that they decided to send you some messages.
Oh, very nice, yeah.
Okay, we'll be back then for Versatile and the music.
Great.
Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogar sustituto para adultos mayores. Contáctanos al 099-753-8085. Síguenos en TikTok, Facebook e Instagram como GoyPasR, Vimeo y YouTube como Radio Serenidad EC. En WhatsApp 593-999-203-203, radioserenidad.com.
So in 2017, you launched Versatile, and there's a song there that took me all the way to your collaborations with the Doobie Brothers and also Peter Gabriel, because you have Salisbury Hill here. First of all, how was your experience touring with Peter Gabriel, or playing for him or with him, or I don't know, how was that experience? Because Peter Gabriel is one of my favorite rock musicians. Yeah,
he's remarkable. Yeah, terrific musician, composer, human.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. I have no idea how I got on that band. except that at one point, their manager called me up. Peter's manager, who was also managing Genesis, and he called me up and says, Peter Gabriel's going to tour, and we would like you to be in the band. And fortunately, I didn't have any of the records, but fortunately, I had just watched a video of Genesis, Watcher of the Skies, which is just like, I love that piece, and it's one of the things they filmed in some film studio somewhere, and I had just seen it. I was just knocked out by it. So I didn't know that Peter was doing a new record, and he said, Peter just done a new record, and we want you to play on this. And I think because the guy who played on the album was Alice Cooper's keyboard player, he didn't want to tour, so there was an opening. And I'm not quite sure how I got in there. I played with some of the other people in the band, Tony Levin and Alan Schwartzberg. I was playing with them. But then our road manager came up to me one night and he said, so Peter and I, before the tour started, Peter and I were up in Toronto doing something and making a record. And we went to see Blue Oyster Cult. And we were talking to them about keyboard players, and they said, oh, you ought to get Phil Aaberg. He's the best keyboard player we ever heard. So Blue Oyster Cult, we'd opened for them with Elvin Bishop. And I remember those guys, love that music. So I still don't quite know how I got into the band, but it was a great experience. It was a terrific band, of course.
But what album was it? Do you recall? Do you remember? What album?
The album of Peter's album?
Yeah.
It was his first album that has Salisbury Hill on it.
Oh, his first album after he broke up with
after he left Genesis, yeah. So we met in New York, and we rehearsed in studio instrument rentals, and Genesis was there. Genesis and Peter Gabriel were all staying in the same brownstone, in New York, and so I met all those guys. We had dinner and then hung out in New York and rehearsed for a little while, and then we hit the road. It was, of course, everybody else in the band knew the pieces, so I had to come ready.
Yeah.
So I knew the pieces when I got there. And the cool thing about that tour, to me, starting off with, was Peter was so flexible about everything. A lot different than what he has to do now, where it's all choreographed and the lighting is particular and everything. I think there's a little bit of space in there, but there was a lot of space when we were playing. And he would come in, once we learned, I had learned the songs and everything, once he realized we had no problem, we didn't really have to rehearse them during sound check. He would bring in these little fragments of pieces. And sometimes it'd just be a little chord. Most of them, he didn't have any lyrics at all. And he'd bring in a little chunk of something, and we'd play it during sound check. And he'd say, okay, well, let's play that tonight. And he'd come up there and he'd do nonsense lyrics to it that sounded like words, but so it was loose. It was really fun that way. And the choreographing was not set, so there were times when I'd be jumping off. Piano. I'd be jumping off the piano bench, and Peter would jump in the air at the same time, and then finally they'd do that so that the lights caught us in midair. And it was just it was loose. And by the time we finished the tour, it had kind of, I won't say coagulated, but kind of in a way, so that it wasn't as loose. Like with Elvin Bishop, I was used to everything. Solos were loose, everything. We didn't know what we were going to do. It was sort of a jam band combination with, top 40 feeling stuff. This kind of solidified more toward when the lights finally got to where they wanted to know exactly what to do. But it was a great band. There was some. It was more like playing in an orchestra really than playing in a band, and so you're playing the songs the same way every time. And it wasn't so much that you were going to go new places. It was always going to be good, but is it going to be really good tonight? That's what you always waited for.
Yeah. Great. Salisbury Hill has it's the story of how he left the band and what happened to him, and it's a great. I think it was an amazing song to tell the story of what happened. So I think you chose a great song for this album. And how about Under the Hood and Dr. Funk?
Under the Hood, yeah. Well, I was touring with this great bluegrass band called Newgrange.
Yeah.
You know, Mike Marshall, Daryl Anger, Allison Brown, Todd Phillips, and Tim O'Brien, you know, plays everything, sings. I was just thinking about him because he was in Salt Lake just a while ago. So this band was great, and so we did one record together that was. We did a couple records together, and then we were supposed to bring in every member of the band was supposed to bring in two pieces, and Daryl Anger and I were out touring as a violin and piano duet, and we realized we had like 2 concerts left, and we hadn't written our pieces, so we had a day off, and it was a blizzard on Lolo Pass, which was kind of really snowy. We had to walk through about 3 feet of snow to get to our cabins. He went to a cabin, and I carried a keyboard to a cabin. By the time we came out, we had our 2 pieces each written, and Under the Hood was one of them.
Oh, great. This is amazing. So, like, obviously, James Smiley asked if you were having a new project, and you mentioned, I think it was in the last show, that you were going to have a new album with synthesizers about these sculptures.
Yes.
When are you releasing this album, or what's your next project to be launched?
So I have a bunch of Christmas concerts coming up and some stuff I have to do before the year. So we'll probably put that together the first part of 2025 and release it then. And then we're also going to do an LP of Live from Montana. There's no LP of that yet. It's all digital.
Great. So looking forward for that. I imagine, I mean, like in the synthesizers, it's another world where when you are composing, because all the different tones and possibilities that you can play with.
Yeah, and the great thing about this synthesizer, it's called the Prophet 6. It's a sequential circuits. It's an analog synth, so it's not sampled instruments. It's all circuits and tubes and stuff, you know. So, and I love the unexpected with this instrument. It's kind of like, you know, if you plug an electric guitar to, you know, an amp that's doing feedback and all. I mean, you can control it to a certain degree, but I love it when it just kind of takes off by itself and suggests a path that you go on, and that happened a lot with this writing of this album.
Well,
so that's 24 pieces. Yeah.
24 pieces sometime in 2025. Well,
yes.
We'll be expecting that and hoping to be able to get it for our collection of all the fans.
Great. Oh, for sure. I'll send you some.
Oh,
I'll
great.
send you some for
Thank
sure.
you. Well, Phil, we're going to end the show today with the music from Versatile and the songs I've mentioned. And I wanted to thank you so much for the time that you've given us, the stories, everything that you've shared. It's been so cool. And I'm sure the fans are going to love it.
Well, you are so great. You're such a great interviewer, and I really appreciate that you do this show. And it's just great to talk with you. You know, I probably said too much, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have somebody that is so knowledgeable about the music.
Oh,
and
how cool.
Yeah.
Before we say goodbye, is there a chance you sort of can improvise anything on your piano?
Sure. Let's see, should I take this off so it's not squeaking all the time? Maybe I can do that. Well, maybe I'll listen. Let's see. What do we have here? I guess you can kind of see that.
Yeah, you're there. How beautiful. That was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank
you so
you.
much. I'm sure everybody who listens is gonna really have a blast listening to this. And so I'll send you the links for the YouTube interview
Please,
and
yeah.
also the Vimeo. Because in Vimeo, I put the link, the whole program with the music in Vimeo. But
Oh,
in
beautiful.
YouTube, only the interview in YouTube and also the links to the Spotify and iVoox. Mostly Spotify, that is where people listen to most in the United States. But
Yes.
great. I'll send you when we publish. Next week is the first show, and the other show is somewhere along the line.
Okay, great. It's been so great to talk with you. I really loved it. Really had a great time.
I did too so much. Thank you very, very much, Phil, and until we meet again.
Till we meet
so
again.
much. Thank you.
Adiós.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Con el auspicio de Plenitud, Ciudad de la Alegría, hogarplenitud.org.es, Serenidad Spa Terapéutico, serenidad.es, Permasalud Glamping, permasalud.com.